So, art after 9/11. You know what's wild? I got out of grad school when this happened, that year. I was actually in Chicago, the School of Art Institute of Chicago, and I was going to my first professional job at Mass MoCA in 9/11. So in some ways, thinking about art after 9/11 is kind of like art after I got a job. We'll call it that. And I want to kind of talk about a few things because in some this will be somewhat biographical as we go through this, but also very much tangible in so much as a lot of the artists I've worked with, lives and art got involved in the post-9/11 narratives, which you will see kind of unfold as I give my talk. My talk has a subtitle which is, "When all the world is a stage, everyone must learn the skills of theater." We all know those images. They totally rattled the world, the United States, New Yorkers, and no one knew what to do with it. There was a moment of vast grief, tragedy, of horror, in almost, to say traumatic is one thing, but on such a scale of people, it was almost bizarre. And no one knew what to do with all that. And there's no moment to reflect. In fact, even 10 years ago, as wild as we had the anniversary of 9/11, and everyone looked around like, I don't even know what to say about it. You notice in New York, they didn't even do a big parade because they didn't even know what to do with it. What is the legacy of 9/11? Why? Why do you feel so weirded out by it? There's a group called Retort, one of their, at Berkeley, a bunch of art people and theorists, and they said this kind of amazing quote. They said, one of the formative moments in the education of Muhammad Atta being the mastermind of the Twin Towers terrorist attack, one of the formative moments in the education of Muhammad Atta, we are told, was when he came to realize the conservation of Islamic Cairo, in which he hoped to participate as a newly trained town planner, was to obey the logic of Disney World. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, one of the things that you can say about this attack here is that, yes, a lot of people died. A lot of people died. But there wasn't the amount of deaths that freaked everyone out, right? It wasn't this just the numbers, right? Because routinely in various kinds of war situations, this many people died. It was the spectacular qualities of that death. What do I mean by that? It was like a movie. And it was made and planned to look like a movie, right? It looked like a scene out of Die Hard. Right? You imagine Bruce Willis jumping out of there, except it wasn't funny because it was light. And it wasn't riveting. But what did that do? Why was it just spectacular? Why learn from Disney World? Well, the thing I'm really interested in thinking about, I work in arts. And arts, Plato back in the day, Plato back in the day, that's another little title for my lecture. He said the realm of politics should not have artists. And I started thinking about why that is in a huge way as I work in the arts, particularly in the intersections of arts and politics. But I'd like to pose something we can think about is that the skill sets of artists have actually become the skill sets of power. That the skills that we used to think in the early 20th century, the arts, the painter in the studio making representation, are now the skill sets of all power. It is the landscape. What do I mean by that? There's some guys named Horkheimer and Adorno from after World War II. They talked about this thing called the culture industry, television, radio, film, these things that we know very tangibly in our lives. These are the skill sets of the arts deployed on a vast cultural level, right? We're all familiar with them. But it's bigger than just the culture industry. Because if you think of the arts also as applied to PR and marketing departments, that is to say the manipulation of symbolic language produced as a tangible kind of skill set to bolster various industries, their role is increasingly powerful. We know this, right? We all intuitively know this. But let's just call that the success of the arts. The arts, as at the beginning of the 21st century, are in everything. Why say that? Because there's a secret other battle that's happening besides the tangible battles in American life that we think of. And it is a battle for our attention, and it is a battle for our emotions. You can think of emotions as a natural resource. The tragedy of 9/11, which, as we all know, was a vast mass tragedy, could also be seen in more cynical views as the production of a vast resource. National tragedies produce a wealth of material to work with. When you have tons of raw emotion, you also have tons of people interested in something. And people can easily use that for different needs. Let's go to some art. Two artists, Julien Leverrier and Paul Miotta, had a studio on the 91st floor of the World Trade Center's North Tower. And they were actually working at the time with the organization I now work for, which is called Creative Time. We do public art in New York City. And this would be considered public art. It's art in public space. They were working on this idea, originally called Phantom Towers. And then the World Trade Centers were attacked. And this idea gained a lot more traction as something that people wanted to realize. So, some architects grabbed this, then the city got interested, and this became what was called, after conversations with the various groups representing the victims of 9/11, it became known as the Tribute in Light. And I don't know, a lot of you familiar with this image? You guys know this? It's funny because at Creative Time, we can show you all kinds of art projects no one knows, but they know this one. And so the artists got behind this, and it's interesting because they meant this is when all the emotions in New York City were raw. You familiar with all the kind of street memorials that were kind of built ad hoc? People were gathering together, and this went up. It's an interesting background story that mayor at the time, Rudy Giuliani, kind of his inner artist came out. He actually was proposing that the lights were red, white, and blue. But the artists were like, no! But apparently the Empire State Building over here acquiesced. The artists wanted it to be a one-time deal. They just wanted this to go up once, and then that would be it. It was meant to be this kind of ephemeral, temporary thing. But as you know, or maybe you don't know, every year this goes up in honor of 9/11. The artists basically backed out and were kind of annoyed that this kept going. But it kept going, and the city took it on. And the meaning of 9/11 every year, and the meaning of this artwork every year, changes and changes. In more cynical circles, as time went on, people began to compare this monument to other similar monuments. This is the Cathedral of Light. It was produced by the Nazi propaganda mastermind Albert Speer. He produced these at the Nuremberg rallies that consisted of 130 anti-aircraft searchlights going up. These were meant to bolster the kind of war machine of the Third Reich. Now, I only say that because also the visual kind of correlations are pretty striking. But it seems a bit much to say the memorial 9/11 has some sort of clearly aesthetic correlations to this Nazi kind of moment. But what's also interesting is in some ways this art action became a vehicle for drumming up support for George Bush's war in Iraq, which we're familiar with weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, Saddam Hussein had them, we know this story. In New York City, emotions quickly turned to a different way because there were many protests in the lead up to the war with artists. This is a group of artists. It came out in September, which is amazing, September 22nd, 11 days after September 11th. And it said, "Our grief is not a cry for war." Our grief is not a cry for war. And this became a phrase by anti-war activists to say, hey, we're sad, but we don't want you to go kill people in Iraq. This was the kind of cry. But in fact, as we know, we did go to war, and the Patriot Act came away. Something I want to posit in thinking about mass grief in an era of mass military, mass capital, and and mass power that builds a lot of its energy off raw emotion. Mass grief, I would posit, is in fact a cry for war. I think mass grief is such a powerful tool that it is difficult to not have it be a vehicle for war. What is spectacle? Spectacle is an idea came by an annoying French guy named Guy Debord. And he said, the spectacle is not a collection of images, but a social relation among people mediated by images. What does that mean? Well, we all know, we all live in the land of images, so it's hard to unpack ourselves from this kind of current era we're in. But he was interested in this moment where what happens when all of our culture is secret? I'm distilling it. What happens, but I'm asking you too. What does it mean when all our cultures actually just wants you to buy it? Basically, all culture is an advertisement, right? Everything's an advertisement, be it images. Everything wants something from you. That's spectacle, in a sense, because it begins to navigate the ways we relate to each other. What is affect? Besides the emotion you feel when you see this hamburger, which looks delicious. To impress the mind or move the feelings. I'm going to tell you something very transparently. I'm trying to think through these kind of questions myself because I feel like something very strange is happening in the world that we should put our finger on. Why? Because spectacle we know exists, right? We know that capital culture, business culture, uses the culture around us to get money out of us. We're familiar with this and it's exhausting, but that's our life. But something that politics has understood recently, more recently, that advertising has always known, is that how you feel is more important than what you think. Advertising knows that it can send you an image of something you can't stand, but it'll stay in your head longer than if it's something you don't agree with, or something you agree with. That your raw emotional state, the way we as people work, our emotions actually last longer in us than our rational mind. I think this is why Plato didn't want the arts in politics. And this reality may be part of the fact that when people complain about contemporary politics that has nothing to do with the issues, maybe it's because the issues aren't what gets you to vote. Maybe it's just a strategic manipulation of your emotions by all parties involved because they know that's what works. Why do I say that? Because that's typically what artists do. Artists are the ones that are supposed to do emotions, right? They do the emotions, they do the irrational, and politics does the rational. But now we're in the landscape of the irrational politics, right? We're in the realm of the irrational politics. Why? Because it works. Read a book by Karl Rove. He'll tell you. He'll tell you. He'll say, oh my gosh, these guys are so stupid, you know? They focus on the issues. I'd focus on the issues if they worked. If they don't work, focusing on the issues won't get you elected. What is art? Let's think broadly what art is. Art is the product or process of deliberately arranging items, often with symbolic significance, in a way that influences and affects one or more of the senses, emotions, and intellect. Well, if you say that, and I know I'm being picky because we could all debate what art is, and some people, and just for the record, I'm not saying this is all art is, but let's just say for now, for argumentation's sake, that that's what we call art. Well, you could also say that's the same definition of what a PR team in any major firm does, right? You could say basically any mastermind in the Obama campaign, in the Santorum campaign, in the Newt Gingrich campaign, in the Romney campaign, whatever. You could say any one of them would say, that's my mission, that's what I do. That's what I am. That's my job. That's how we produce politics. Why am I saying this? Because this is what art is after 9/11. There's the real art. Strangely enough, in 1991, there was a show called The Real World. Do you guys remember it? Is it still around? That's amazing. You gotta say that's amazing, right? How did that last so long? Well, What's cool about the real world, I gotta just personally tell you too, I lived in Chicago when just the same time as 9/11 happened. The real world came to Chicago, and me and my friends got together and got arrested by the real world because we tried to liberate the actors from their unreality, which was very entertaining. It was kind of meant as a stunt. We got a lot of attention for it, which was really fun. I even got on Fox News where I was like, this isn't just a television show, it's trying to raise the prices in this neighborhood so it'll gentrify it with these stupid multicultural hipsters. I got to say that on TV. That was fun. But what's interesting is the real world is in fact a kind of metaphor for our lives. We are in a world that is always aware of itself on television, on the internet. We video each other video us. We are kind of, Andy Warhol said everyone gets 15 minutes of fame. But you're lucky. This generation gets their whole lives of fame. You get the whole package. You're always famous. What do we do in a world of spectacle where the phrase I use for this lecture is, if the whole world is a stage, thus the real world, then everyone needs to learn the skills of theater. Right? What is politics today? There's Sarah. Okay, hi Sarah. You know what? Maybe some of you are big fans of Sarah Palin. It's okay, it's all right. I feel like strangely she looks like Tina Fey. I don't know. It's a kind of uncanny resemblance. But I think this theory of spectacle and affect only makes sense as a way to explain Sarah Palin, because you can't do it empirically. Certainly not. But what is the resonance of this if it's not emotional? But, to be fair, against Republicans and Democrats, which I'm happy to do, I think the Obama campaign was clearly, I don't think it's accidental that this poster has those Pepsi colors. Or designed by Shepard Fairey, like the urban graffiti guy that's in cahoots with Urban Outfitters, right? Like, this is a style campaign too, isn't it? Yes, we can. Can what? Change we can believe in? I don't know. Right now I'm feeling no. I don't know if I believe it. But I do know it's an effective marketing campaign. We can all agree with that. And while the left wing will always ridicule the right for being very clever, Karl Rove and such, but the right, the Democrats do it too. Everyone does it, right? And what is the Patriot Act if not the same thing, right? Patriotism. You know what patriotism is? It's a massive marketing campaign. It's a massive deployed marketing campaign using the resources of fear and depression and anxiety as a way to bolster certain agendas. And this is just what happens. When I was at Mass MoCA, curating there, I had an artist named Steve Kurtz that was in my exhibition called The Interventionist, where he was going to do this project, here it is, where they were going to test organic foods for genetically modified organisms. So you could bring in your potato chips, like organic potato chips. They would have a laboratory and they would test it to let you know if there was any GMOs, what they're called, in your potato chips. Well, a week before the show opened, Steve Kurtz's wife died at home of a heart attack. He called the police. The police came over. He had this laboratory in his house. They called the FBI. The FBI called the terrorism task force. They arrested him. They charged him with being a bioterrorist. It was all over the news. They confiscated the art project from our show. They used, strangely enough, my invitation to the exhibition as a way to serve warrants because there was an artist from Lebanon in it and there was Arabic on the invitation to this art show. And they said this is part of the evidence that he's a terrorist. This stuff makes no sense right now, but it did back then, right? We lived in the land of total surreal patriotism, war on terror, chaos. Well, there it is, wanted by the FBI, Steve Kurtz in the face of terror. And so he was considered a bioterrorist. And this went on for a long time. 6 years he was in courts defending himself. I could go on and on about this story, and it's super interesting. But I want to posit that the real artist in this project was the U.S. Attorney, William Hope. There he is. This is the face of the new artist of the 21st century. But what did William Hope have to do with this? Well, he knew. Look at this guy. That's Steve Kurtz. He knew calling that guy an artist that uses genetic material as his work, that has a background in anarchism, is going to be a perfect target to get himself in the Bush regime up the ranks. Right? He knew how to manipulate emotion and symbolic language, and he knew how to get what he wanted. So he manipulated all that so that he could get further up. And guess what? He did. Just recently, Obama made him a U.S. attorney of the major northern part of New York. So he just keeps moving up the ranks. So here's our new artist today. Here's an artist named Hassan Alahi during the kind of Patriot Act era. He was accidentally put on the terrorist watch list. And so what he decided to do to combat them was he photographed everything in his life and archived it online so that he'd have more information on his website than the FBI would. He'd archive them to death, was his plan. So here's everything he was eating, and he figured I'll just bury them in information about myself. Which is a funny response. I don't know if this is going to work, I hope so. I actually was here a while ago. We did a project with an artist named Jeremy Deller called It Is What It Is, Conversations About Iraq, where we traveled around the country with a car that had been blown up in Baghdad during the war, with a U.S. soldier that just got back from serving and an Iraqi who sought asylum here, who was a UN translator. And they would go to towns, we actually were up on the VCU campus, and they would talk to people about their experiences. Here's a clip of that. I don't know if this is going to work. No.
It's like I'm glad I'm listening hungry because of that night I was really close down there. Yeah, once you turn over. Yeah.
You can't hear very well. So this is a vet who, and this happened all the time. We had vets come and, kids are very young, served over there, who would come and just tell their stories for hours and hours and hours. I'm only showing these because for us, a lot of the artists that we worked with over the last 10 years, we're trying to find ways to get out of this, insane manipulative logic. This project was trying to produce a space to actually talk about the war that wasn't about good guys, bad guys, but conversation could actually happen. You know what I mean? It's all just... Oh, okay. Sorry, it's not working. That's the soldier's mom. She showed up. She's awesome. Here's another project by a group called the Yes Men and some various others in New York, where they actually reproduced a different New York Times saying the Iraq war ended, and they put them in all the booths all over New York City, which is very provocative. I'm going to show you one other project, and I'm going to land on time. This is a project by an artist named Pedro Reyes, where he did a project in Culiacan, Mexico, where there's all this gun violence around the drug wars, and he asked people to, he partnered with what's like the equivalent of Best Buy in the area. And he said, hey, if people turn in their guns, can you give them coupons to get DVD players or TVs or something? They said yes. So they put these advertisements on television. They're like, hey, if you have a gun, please give it to us. So they've got 1,527 guns accumulated. They brought them all together, and then they melted them all down, made these shovels, and then they went around the city and planted trees with the guns from melted down weapons. It's a great project. Why am I bringing that up? How does this all relate? Because I got to sew this thing up at the end. A lot of artists that I'm very interested in are understanding the production of politics and the production of symbolic language. Because this is it's a symbolic gesture, right? But it's also a real gesture. But it was a way that artists were trying to combat this kind of manipulative world to do something good for the world. And a lot of the artists I'm interested in understand that you have to get into the grip of politics because they're all tied up right now. There's no separating it out. And a lot of organizations that do stuff in the world are also wrestling with a symbolic language. And something I want to posit that's the kind of world we're in now is wrestling with spectacle, the symbolic, is a part of being in the world. There's no thing called the arts over here and the world over there. The arts, the manipulation of symbolic language is the world we're in. And if we don't take those skill sets to produce a just society, one of equity, of fairness, there are those who may not believe in that as much as you do, or perhaps have way more power than you do, who have a lot of those skill sets already in their pocket. So I encourage all of us to do what we can to take that reality seriously to make the world a better place. Thanks!